My name is Diane Brennan. I'm 33 years old, and exactly 5 days before my sister's wedding, my cell phone vibrated on the kitchen counter with a text message that would completely shatter my family's reality. It was from my mother. The message read, "You're uninvited, your sister is marrying into old money, and we won't have your drama embarrassing us on the biggest day of her life." I sat alone in my cramped apartment kitchen, the cheap linoleum cold beneath my feet, reading those two sentences over and over. The coffee in my favorite mug had gone completely cold in my hands. There was no explanation, no softening of the blow, no phone call to let me down gently. It was just a clean surgical cut from the exact family I had spent my entire adult life trying to belong to. Honestly, I wasn't even shocked that my mother was capable of saying something so breathtakingly cruel. I was just shocked at how casually she delivered the blow. It felt like she was canceling a Tuesday night dinner reservation, not erasing her own flesh and blood daughter from her sister's wedding. Renee and I had never been incredibly close. We were entirely different people, but we were still sisters. We had shared a tiny, drafty bedroom until I was 12 years old. We had huddled together and cried on the front porch the night our father packed his bags and left us. But now, because Renee had managed to land herself a fiance with a family name supposedly attached to 3 country club golf courses and a massive international shipping company, I had suddenly become a liability. I was a stain that might show up on the immaculate guest list and remind all the country club elites that the Brennans weren't always old money. In fact, we weren't old anything. We were just a single mother and 2 daughters who had spent a decade clawing our way through late rent notices, clipped coupons, and layaway Christmases. I stared at the screen. I typed out a furious response, deleted it, and typed another. Nothing felt right. The anger inside me wanted to come out as begging, and the begging wanted to come out as pure rage. Neither of those emotions felt like something I could hit send on. Sending a massive paragraph to a woman who had just labeled my mere presence as drama would only prove her point. So I just sat there in the silence of my kitchen, watching the little typing bubbles appear and disappear on the screen, waiting for her next message. I knew my mother. She never ever delivered bad news without following it up with a visual meant to twist the knife just a little bit deeper. Sure enough, less than a minute later, my phone buzzed again. There were no words this time, just a photograph. It was an engagement picture. It was clearly professionally shot. The kind of photo you pay a luxury photographer $300 an hour to take in a botanical garden right at golden hour, so the lighting hits perfectly. Renee looked absolutely breathtaking. She was glowing in a tailored, champagne-colored silk dress, her hair effortlessly swept over one shoulder, laughing candidly at something just outside the frame, and standing right beside her, his arm wrapped tightly and possessively around her waist, was the groom. I zoomed in on his face. I stared at his features for exactly 3 seconds before something deep in my chest went freezing cold. Then a rush of blinding heat shot up my neck, and finally, the tension cracked wide open into a loud, echoing laugh. It wasn't a funny laugh. It was the kind of laughter that doesn't come from humor at all. It comes from a disbelief so absolute, a shock so profound, that your nervous system simply doesn't know what else to do with the adrenaline. I laughed until my ribs physically ached. I laughed until my vision blurred with tears, until my hands were shaking so violently that I had to slam my phone face down onto the granite counter just to steady myself, because I knew that face. I had known that exact face for 4 years, long before my sister Renee had ever brushed shoulders with him at whatever exclusive charity gala or yacht club she claimed had brought them together. I knew the small, jagged scar hidden just above his left eyebrow. I knew the chilling way his smile never quite reached his eyes in photographs, as if there was a calculator constantly ticking behind his pupils, tallying up what he could take from the person looking at him. I knew him intimately because his name wasn't the name printed in elegant gold foil on the wedding invitations my mother had proudly mailed out weeks earlier. The name on the wedding website was Weston Cole, the elusive heir to Cole Maritime Holdings. But the man in that photograph, the man my sister was preparing to pledge her life to in exactly 5 days, had another name entirely. A name from a much darker life. A name tied to a version of him that my social climbing family had absolutely no idea existed. My mind raced backward through years of memories, desperately trying to piece together how this collision of worlds was even physically possible. How could the same man operate in 2 completely different universes without either side catching on? I remembered the last time I had seen him. The circumstances were so far removed from champagne toasts, country clubs, and old money weddings that the 2 images violently rejected each other in my brain. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated panic my mother would feel if she knew the truth. I thought about what Renee would do if she found out she was 5 days away from walking down a rose-petal aisle toward a phantom. I picked the phone back up, the glass screen cold against my sweaty palm. Getting uninvited from the wedding suddenly felt like the smallest, most insignificant problem in the room. My mother thought she was protecting our family's fragile new reputation by locking the front door and keeping me out. She had no idea that the real threat to her precious reputation was already sitting inside the house, wearing a $3,000 custom-tailored Italian suit, flashing a $1 million smile for the cameras, and patiently waiting for a wedding day that was about to become the biggest nightmare of their lives. I opened my contacts list and scrolled down to the one number I hadn't dialed in over 2 years. My thumb hovered nervously over the green call button. I knew that once I made this phone call, a bomb was going to go off. There would be no quiet, polite way to walk back from the destruction that was coming. But some doors, once you realize what's hiding behind them, simply cannot be left shut. I took one massive, stabilizing breath, and I pressed call. 5 days wasn't a lot of time, the phone connected on the third ring. A gruff, familiar voice answered on the other end. He sounded cautious, like he already sensed this wasn't just a friendly catch-up. His name was Grant Holloway. He was a private investigator I had hired 2 years earlier during a vicious, drawn-out legal dispute with a corrupt former landlord. Grant was a bulldog. He was the one person I knew on the planet who could pull a real, heavily guarded background check on someone faster than any of us could Google our way through it. I didn't waste time asking how his wife was doing. I got straight to the point. I told him I needed absolutely everything he could legally and illegally scrape together on a man going by the name Weston Cole. And then, my voice shaking slightly in the quiet of my kitchen, I told him exactly why. Grant went dead quiet for a long, heavy moment. When he finally spoke, his words confirmed the icy dread that had already settled into the pit of my stomach. He recognized the physical description I gave him instantly, because the man photographed looking lovingly at my sister wasn't named Weston Cole. His real name was Julian Ferris. 2 years earlier, Julian had been the silent partner in the exact property management scam I had fought in court. He had been under federal investigation for running a sophisticated real estate and investment scheme that had completely drained the life savings and retirement accounts of at least 6 middle-class families. Right before the indictments came down, he had slipped across state lines, liquidated his assets into crypto, and vanished like a ghost from every public database that mattered. I sat with that toxic information for a long time after Grant and I hung up. I just stared at the popcorn ceiling of my apartment as the puzzle pieces clicked together with sickening, terrifying clarity. Julian hadn't married into old money. He had built an entire synthetic identity around it. He had a fabricated family tree, a beautifully designed fake website for a maritime holding company that Grant confirmed had only been registered to an anonymous server 8 months ago, and a trail of brilliant half-truths. It was the perfect trap, designed specifically to fool a woman like my sister. A woman so desperate to prove she had climbed out of poverty that she was blinded by the glare of the fake gold he was waving in her face. Renee wasn't marrying generational wealth, she was marrying a predator. And in 5 days, she was going to stand up in front of 200 wealthy guests, sign a legally binding marriage certificate, and hand the keys to her entire life over to a man who did this for a living. The hardest part wasn't digging up the truth. The hardest part was figuring out how to deliver the bomb. I knew my mother's cruel text was still sitting there, unanswered. I knew that the second I opened my mouth, my mother and sister would immediately write me off. They would roll their eyes and assume I was just a bitter, jealous sister trying to sabotage the wedding because I got cut from the guest list. They would call it drama. So I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Renee either. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour printing shop. I printed out every single PDF Grant had securely emailed me. The hidden financial records, the shell company registrations, the fabricated tax documents, and the undeniable holy grail. Police mug shots and courthouse photographs of Julian looking disheveled under his real name during a preliminary hearing 18 months earlier. I put it all in a thick manila folder, got in my car, and drove directly to my sister's luxury high-rise apartment because some truths are too heavy to be delivered through a text message. When Renee yanked the door open, she was already scowling. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest. She was fully prepared for a screaming match about the wedding invitations. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just walked past her into the living room, handed her the heavy folder, and softly told her she needed to sit down on the couch before she opened it. I stood in silence and watched her face change, page by page. The annoyed scowl melted into pure confusion. Then the confusion warped into stubborn disbelief. And finally, by page 4, that disbelief shattered into something that looked exactly like grief. She fought it at first. She kept shaking her head, her voice cracking as she insisted it couldn't be true. She said she had met his parents over Zoom. She said she had seen the lease for his corporate office downtown. She accused me of forging the documents, of being a jealous, spiteful sister who couldn't stand to see her win. But court documents don't lie the way con artists do. By the time she reached the courthouse photos of the man she loved, her hands were trembling just as violently as mine had been in the kitchen. She called our mother that exact same night. For the first time in over a decade, I heard my mother's voice on speakerphone, and it wasn't coded in pride, judgment, or control. It cracked. She sounded terrified. There was no magical, old money wedding 5 days later. Instead, there was a quiet, agonizing unraveling. There was a frantic phone call to cancel the $40,000 venue. There was an emergency meeting with a private security firm to change all of Renee's locks and freeze her bank accounts. And eventually, there was a lengthy police report that triggered a federal flag, connecting Julian Ferris to 2 completely new victims in a neighboring state who had come forward after his aliases resurfaced in the system. Julian, realizing the jig was up, vanished into the wind 48 hours before the ceremony was supposed to take place. My mother never explicitly apologized for that text message. Some people's pride simply won't let them, but she did call me 3 days after the dust settled. Her voice was smaller and more fragile than I had ever heard it. She asked me to come over to the house. She asked me to help her figure out how to handle the canceled vendor contracts. And I went. I didn't go because the deep wound from her text message had magically healed. I went because family, even a messy, broken, deeply imperfect one, still means showing up when the house is actually burning down. Renee only thanked me once. It was months later, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. We were sitting at a diner, picking at coffees neither of us intended to finish. She looked out the window, her voice barely above a whisper, and told me that if I hadn't laughed at that photograph, if I had simply let my feelings be hurt and stayed away like they asked, she never would have questioned a single thing. That one bitter laugh, born out of pure shock in my lonely lonely kitchen ended up being the only warning siren loud enough to stop a total disaster from ruining her life. My mother's perfect, pristine, old money wedding never took place. And the embarrassing daughter she had tried so ruthlessly to erase from the family portrait ended up being the only one who could save it. What would you guys have done in this situation? If your family uninvited you from a wedding, would you have still stepped up to save your sister from a scammer? Or would you have let her walk down the aisle and find out the hard way? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want to hear more crazy true stories like this, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe.